Well, you see behind us in rural Louisiana was sitting dormant, waiting to possibly be used again.
People who lived nearby this well thought it was abandoned and there was no danger. That is, until a teenage girl fell victim to this discarded danger.
Off the court, around the rim.
14-year-old Zaylee Day was an A student on the honor roll.
She loved the library. She loved knowledge.
She started reading books at the age of 3.
She was fun. She was purposeful, direct. She knew what she wanted to do before she did it.
And today we're just gonna be hanging out.
Zaylee dreamed of becoming a lawyer, then a judge, but with big plans in the future, she still showed her innocence, acting out scenes from her favorite Shakespeare play. Her stage, these abandoned oil tanks.
She loved Romeo and Juliet. It was her thing. And those tanks were her towers. You know, she'd climb on top of them and act like she was being Juliet.
Those tanks became a neighborhood playground of sorts. And you said there were kids all
the time. There were kids playing on this. I mean, there were police officers that drove right down there to that trailer when kids were playing on this.
The neighborhood thought the oil company that owned the tank and well, Urban Oil, plugged and abandoned, or P&A'd, the well.
Beauregard police officers would come right through this location. Kids were playing here, and nobody ever said anything. Because everyone assumed it was a dead well. Everyone assumed it was a P&A'd well.
But it wasn't, and on February 28th of this year, Zaylee's life ended.
Okay, it blew up 200 feet, went that away, arched over that away 400 yards, flew over the two-story house back there, flew over the trailer, landed in the pasture behind it.
Zaylee was alone, playing in the tanks. We're about to show you surveillance video of the explosion from a nearby church. We want to warn you, processing what Zaylee's father just said with this video may be disturbing, but the family wants you to see what happened to their little girl.
She went 200 feet in the air and 400 yards in distance. Her body was so crushed we had to have a closed casket.
Urban Oil told us in a statement there were warning signs on the site prior to the accident, alerting the community of the potential danger, writing there was a no trespassing sign and notice to keep off the tanks. Urban Oil sent us these pictures as proof, though metadata connected to this picture shows it might have been taken at a different location. Zaylee's family disputes Urban's claims and says the landowners gave everyone permission to roam their property, adding she and the other kids weren't trespassing, the tanks had no signs, there was no fencing.
Zaylee was a very smart, law-abiding child. If there had been signs saying explosives or something warning her, she would have stayed away from her. There was nothing at all, nothing.
The well owned by Urban Oil was not plugged because it's on a special list that allows essentially abandoned wells to stay unplugged. The state calls them shut-in future utility wells, which are inactive. But instead of plugging these wells after being listed as a shut-in for 5 years, operators can pay the state a $250 annual assessment to keep them on the list. The companies are telling the state they might be of future use. Right now, the state has around 18,000 of these wells, including the one that killed Zaylee Day. Nearly half of these wells have been on this list for more than 10 years.
But we know the longer a well stays in that shut-in status, the more likely it's going to be that way forever and possibly end up with us.
There are some wells that have been shut-in wells for decades.
Yes.
I mean, it's basically an orphan well that hasn't been plugged.
That's kind of how we see it too.
The state has set up a system that essentially makes it more affordable to label a well as a shut-in instead of plugging it. The lower end of plugging a well costs about $50,000. A company could instead pay that $250 fee every year, and it would take 200 years, about 2 lifetimes, to reach that $50,000 cost. So these can just go on and on and on.
As long as they've got an operator who's maintaining them within the rules.
What's the motivation to plug the well?
There is no motivation. There is no motivation.
Look at the map. These wells are all over the state. Here's a massive set of tank batteries in St. Mary Parish, another in Acadia Parish. We found this well in St. Charles Parish. Shut-in wells in 57 of the state's 64 parishes. And right now, the state has no existing regulations to warn residents of potential dangers.
That's ridiculous. For you to have, or myself to have a fence around a swimming pool, state law, but you don't have to have one around an explosive volatile oil field site. What happened here?
Why wasn't the state forcing companies to do that?
Previously, best sense we can come up with looking at, because I mean, this has been what it's been. One thing we've been doing over the past 5-6 years is trying to bring a lot of old policies up to date to try to make them what they should have been all along.
The state hasn't even inspected some of these shut-in wells in over a decade. Back in October of last year, instead of plugging and abandoning the well that killed Zaylee Day, Urban Oil decided to place it on this list.
I hold the oil company, and frankly, I hold the politicians too. I don't mean to be ugly, it's like there were no guidelines. There was no boundaries.
Zaylee's father, Maxwell Smith, worked on oil fields for 30 years.
But Zaylee was only here to visit us. She was too good, and for her to go that quick and that fast.
He says the industry that put food on his table has left him unable to work. Two parents left with these horrifying images, and a teenage daughter gone too soon, too young.
I rode bulls, I raced motorcycles, done all kinds of things, but I can't seem to shake this. I haven't worked since it happened. It's ridiculous, you know, your mind just goes on you. I went through red lights, thinking about my mind will be in a cloud, and I'll just drive through a red light.
It's just not right. It's just so unfair. I see her big smile. She was gonna make a difference. She already did make a difference in everything.
That incident took place in Beauregard Parish, which is north of Lake Charles. Following the death of Zaylee, the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources said they are preparing a rule for sites like the one in Beauregard Parish to have fencing securing the site. The company that owned the well in our story, Urban Oil and Gas, based in Texas, said in a statement both the Louisiana Oil and Gas Association and the Office of Conservation are assessing appropriate measures to help ensure an accident like this does not happen again. We will look forward to learning about their recommendations. We will continue to strictly adhere to all local, state, and federal safety requirements. You can read the full statement from Urban Oil and Gas and watch extended interviews from more of Zaylee's family members in this story on fox8live.com.